Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Red Thread with me, Catrice Horsley. Today is episode 5 of the series, and for those of you who have just jumped onto this episode, the Red Thread is all about why we believe what we believe about ourselves and how that forms this red thread of our identity, this central belief, this central story that we have about ourselves. And if that story isn't working for us, if it isn't giving us what we want, what we can do to change it, how we can become aware of it, kind of deconstruct it, pull apart the fabric of our lives in order to identify it, and how we can start to weave the warp and weft of our lives again in order to create the lives we want. So that's a little brief summary of the red thread. Just to let you all know, the dog is down here sleeping. He may waken at any point and he might make a noise. That will not be me, that will be the dog. Today's episode is all about the imagined self, where we are now and where we want to be. And you can see there are little pointers and things that we have to overcome on the way. We've talked a little bit about that with regards to monsters and beasts on the path. And today I'm going to talk about how we can kind of break down this journey into more simple steps. Now, I think I spoke about it in the previous episode. One of the things that we are biologically wired for is to survive as a species. And because of that, we are often looking for threats. And so when we start to imagine things, we actually have a little bit of a tendency to think of the worst possible thing that could happen in order to be able to survive that should it happen. My daughter calls it catastrophizing. I think it's a phrase that they use a lot in the States. And she will accuse me very often of catastrophizing because my thought process will go something like, why isn't he home yet? He's been gone an hour. He was out with the dog. I don't know where he went. Those paths can be treacherous in the forest in the rain. Perhaps he slipped. Perhaps he slipped and he hit his head and he's now unconscious and the dog is howling or the dog is running around the forest. And because I don't know where he is, and then if he is damaged or injured, my loved one, then how am I going to get him to the hospital or know what hospital? And then how am I going to pay all of those bills that come through if I don't know all of the systems yet? And then how are his kids going to travel down here? And will they chuck me out of the country? Do I have residency? Literally, that's where my thoughts will go. And then my husband will walk in the door and he says, oh, yeah, I just popped in to see my mom. My daughter calls it catastrophizing. I possibly think of it as forward planning, but with a very heightened sense of anxiety. However, I also, as well as going in that kind of slightly spiraling, chaotic anxiety pathway, I also have this idea of giving myself 3 wishes. You know, if I could fly, if I was perfectly fluent in Swedish, if I was really good at gymnastics and I could do handstands and press lifts up into handstands and blah, 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 blah. And so I imagine all of these amazing things happening as well. So I have a tendency to go both ways. And if we want to create this life that we want to live, if we want to identify this red thread of who we are and what we are and how we want to be, and create the life around ourselves that we want to live, we have to have a very strong sense of it. What is it that we actually want? And in many ways, when we think of that, because of the way our society here in kind of Europe, the West, has pushed us and the story it's given us, we tend to think of achievements and goals rather than kind of aspirations with regards to I want to be happier, I want to be more content, I want to be able to identify what gives me joy, I want to be grateful for what gives me joy. We tend to not think automatically of those. It will be, I want a better job, I want to earn more money, I want to do less hours, I want to spend whatever. And there are these kind of objective goals that you can tick and tick and tick and tick. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with those, but all of those goals will be dependent on the behavior that you show. So if you're not willing to put in the work, a lot of those goals won't be achievable. So one of the things that we should be looking at developing is perhaps resilience or perseverance, etc., etc. Rather than looking at the top goal and the symbol for it, we should be looking at developing the behavior that lies beneath that possible achievement. And as soon as we start to do that, as soon as we start to think about, I want to develop my resilience, or I want to kind of notice more about what makes me happy, that simple thought, that simple change redirects our vision, our perception, so that we start to identify them more readily. But if we're not articulating them and if we're not identifying them, then we can't see them when they cross our paths. So we need kind of one foot in this imagined future, this imagined self, and one foot here. And we need to know what that looks like, feels like, sounds like, that imagined future, in order to recognize it when it crosses our path. Because it's not just about us putting in the hard work, but also about us identifying the direction we need to go when certain opportunities arise. It's almost like with every one of those thoughts. So when I was ill, I had some problems with my lung and I had to have lung surgery, and there was quite a convalescence afterwards and the period of not being able to work. I decided that after the surgery, I probably wouldn't be able to do the work that I could do before. It was kind of killing me. Way too much work, way too intense. And I thought I have to work less and earn more by doing less work. So I need to charge more. And in order to charge more, I need to offer something quite unique and that's worth that amount of money. And I started to totally replan the work that I offered and how I offered that work. So, in some ways, I didn't change a huge amount of the work that I did, but I altered the way I presented it. I altered the story I told about it in many ways. But what that also meant was, because I was doing that, I was looking for those opportunities and looking for those situations subconsciously. So if something came up, perhaps in the past, I would have said yes to just going into a school and telling stories to the children. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a brilliant thing to do. And it's brilliant for the children. It's brilliant for the teachers. I would have said yes, 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 yes. But I started saying, no, I'm not going to do that unless I can do staff training at the end of the day. And if I do staff training, the work will be more sustainable and you'll understand the powerful impact that stories and words have on children's development. So I wasn't presenting myself as a person who was almost an entertainer with regards to storytelling. I was sharing my expertise around child development and language. So I was actually saying no to a lot more stuff, which made people kind of curious and intrigued about, well, what was I offering? So that made a huge difference to my work, and I ended up being able to charge more and work less. It happened. I've never had the thing about having a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, or I want to be here, this is my imagined self and I'm going to have this 5-year goal of where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be doing, etc. But I'm a brilliant daydreamer. And I quite often, when I wake up or before I go to sleep, spend a lot of time daydreaming about what might happen, what could happen, what if this happened, what if. And I think it's a brilliant daydream to have, because it is essentially a very loose 5-year plan, 3-year plan, or 2-year plan. So some of us will have those very tick box things that we do, and that we want to achieve. And some of us might say, no, I don't have a 5-year plan, but we are brilliant daydreamers. And that is a type of 5-year plan. One of the things that can happen to us if we do have this kind of idea of where we would like to be, what we would like to be doing, one of the things that can overwhelm us is it's all too big and it's too far away. And even with some of us, especially if we're people of color, we're people of color. If you are people of color, I'm not. It's a difficult one. Or if we are people with disabilities, or if we are people who um, are not seen as the main cohort of the population, we won't even see ourselves represented in these worlds. And we might not even know that those are accessible to us because we don't see people like us in those situations. I remember reading about Oprah Winfrey and the impact that seeing Lieutenant Uhuru in Star Trek, the black woman who was the communications officer, when Oprah Winfrey saw her, and suddenly it was like, my God, she's like me, and I could be a communications officer, I could be an astronaut, I could fly on a spaceship, and suddenly there was an identification with somebody because you saw somebody who represented how you saw yourself. In a position in a story that you might not have even known was open to you. So I really want to acknowledge that when I talk about imagined selves, that there is a need for representation of people who look like us in these imagined futures. We need a real big representation because there is a hugely toxic impact around misrepresentation, but there is also a huge toxic impact about no representation too. So there's this idea of this, it's all too overwhelming, it's too big, I'm never going to be able to do that. And one of the first things that I say to people if I'm coaching them is, this might be where you want to be, this is a possible future for you. I would always say never make a definite point on the horizon, but just have a general horizon. Like, I want to be able to write, I want to be published. These are my kind of dreams for my future. I want to be a writer, I want to have books published, and I would like to do book tours, but not too many. I want the books to do the work for me. So it's not a very specific book. It's not a very specific place that I want to live or be or anything. It's just that I want to be a writer and I want the books to do the work for me. That's pretty vague, but it's a horizon. And then on that horizon, there might be certain little pinpoints that I might direct to, but I need the width of the horizon because what happens is life. And you might have a very specific pathway and point on that horizon, and then something happens like COVID. And if you haven't got like this idea of there are several pathways towards it, then you're going to get knocked big time and think, I can't achieve it, because you thought there was only one point there and only one path there. And in actual fact, the broader your horizon, the easier it is to get there in many ways. So you have this idea of your horizon, where you want to get to, a little bit overwhelming, a little bit too far away. And I say to people, so if here is where you are now, and there, my hand that you can't see, is where you want to get, what's halfway? What is the halfway point? And then people say, okay, I need to start writing and I need to have the idea for the book. Okay, so you need to start writing, you need to have the idea for the book. That's a good halfway point. And what's halfway to that? Writing and having the idea for the book. Okay, that is to give myself perhaps 2 or 3 days to write down all the ideas for the book that I might have, and then to choose one of the ideas and follow through with that. Okay, brilliant. So you need to book a couple of days or allocate those. What's halfway towards that? Okay, I need to have a conversation with my husband about the fact that I'm going to be going away for a couple of days, blah, 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 blah. So it is literally this idea of working backwards from your halfway point until you say something where you think, oh, I can do that tomorrow. And then you build it up sliver by sliver by sliver by sliver by sliver, like a cake being built up in sections. And then suddenly you're at the halfway point, and then you do the whole process again. I have found that incredibly useful when I feel that everything is too far away or everything is too big. I literally slice it up, slice it up, slice it up, slice it up, slice it up until I get just that perfect mouthful that I know I can consume and it's not going to give me indigestion. So I hope that was a useful little idea. I would also say that when you are visualizing it, you all know, if you've been following the channels that I do in the series that I do, that I can't visualize. I have something called aphantasia. But when you imagine, in whatever way you imagine your future, it really does impact on you in a physical way. Most sports coaches will say that the difference between a good athlete and a brilliant athlete is their ability to visualize themselves winning. So the more time we give to daydreaming, to planning, to visualizing, to imagining these futures that we want, the more likely they are to manifest themselves. One of my absolute favorite quotes is by Goethe. I didn't used to know his name was pronounced like that, and I used to say Goethe until somebody corrected me. Whatever you dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Think of where you want to be. What's the halfway point? What's the halfway point to there? What's the halfway point to there? That is your beginning. Begin your futured, imagined self now. The next episode and the final episode in this series of The Red Thread is all going to be about the daily practices, the daily things that we can do in order to mark that beginning and make that journey happen. So please subscribe to the channel. Please join us on our Instagram page and have the most wonderful day. Bye-bye for now.